Me, Clyde, 37, software engineer. Been married to Eva for about 6 years. Life was pretty normal, you know. We had our rhythm. I'd get up first, make the coffee just how she liked it. She'd handle the decorative stuff around the house because I have the artistic sense of a brick. We had our shows we'd watch, our inside jokes. It wasn't a movie romance, but it was comfortable. It was our life. I thought we were a team. Then, maybe a year or so ago, things started to shift. It was subtle at first. Eva got really into some online blogs and forums. She also made a new friend at her book club. This friend was intense. Suddenly, our conversations started feeling like pop quizzes I hadn't studied for. New words started entering our vocabulary. Words like emotional labor, mental load, and the big one, toxic masculinity. At first, I tried to be supportive. Sounded like she was learning about psychology or something. I'd listen when she talked about how society puts unfair expectations on women. I'd nod and say, "Yeah, that sounds tough." Didn't really think it had much to do with us, personally. We were just Clyde and Eva. We were fine. My mistake was thinking this was an academic interest for her. It wasn't. It was a new lens through which she viewed everything, especially me. Little things I did for years were suddenly symptoms of a deep-seated problem. Forgetting to take out the recycling wasn't just forgetfulness anymore. It was weaponized incompetence. She explained it to me very seriously one night. It was the idea that men pretend to be bad at chores, so the woman just gives up and does it herself. I was just standing there, holding the trash bag I'd forgotten, completely baffled. I didn't pretend. I just genuinely forgot. My mind was on a bug in the code I'd been chasing all day. Trying to explain this was pointless. My explanation was dismissed as defensiveness, a classic sign of male fragility. So I just started triple-checking the chores, set reminders on my phone for everything. It was easier than having another lecture. Another time, I held a door open for her and an older lady at the grocery store. Later in the car, Eva was quiet. I asked what was wrong. She told me that holding a door open is a microaggression. It stems from a patriarchal belief that women are weak and need a man's help. I just drove. I had no idea what to even say to that. The man I was raised to be, polite, considerate, was now apparently a problem. It felt like the rules of the game were being changed while I was still playing, and nobody handed me the new rule book. The atmosphere in the house grew tense. I felt like I was constantly being graded on my performance as a modern, non-toxic man, and I was failing, though I never understood the criteria. The breaking point, the thing that kicked off the real nightmare, was unbelievably stupid. It was about almond milk. Eva had gotten into a specific brand of organic, artisan, probably sung-to-sleep almond milk. It was twice the price, and only sold at one specific health food store across town. She asked me to pick some up on my way home from work. It was a Friday. The week had been brutal. A huge project deadline was looming, and I'd been pulling 10-hour days. My brain was fried. I went to our regular grocery store out of habit. I remembered the milk, but they only had the normal brands. I figured something was better than nothing, so I grabbed the best-looking one they had and headed home. I walked in, exhausted but kind of happy the week was over, unpacked the groceries, put her almond milk front and center in the fridge. She came in a few minutes later, opened the fridge. Silence. The kind of silence that's louder than shouting. Then she said, "This is the wrong one." I explained I was tired, went to the wrong store by mistake, but I still remembered to get some. I thought she'd appreciate the effort. That was another mistake. It wasn't about the milk. It was about listening. It was about how my not going to a specific store for a specific milk was a clear sign of my disrespect for her needs, how I didn't value her enough to perform a simple task correctly. It escalated from there. She started talking about how this was a pattern. how my inability to follow simple instructions was a form of asserting dominance. It was my subconscious male privilege showing, trying to remind her that my time and convenience were more important than her requests. I just snapped. Not yelling, but my voice was tight. I told her it was just milk, that I was exhausted from working all week to pay for our mortgage and our groceries, including her fancy almond milk. Then maybe she could cut me some slack for one tiny, insignificant mistake. The look on her face. It wasn't anger. It was a cold, clinical look, like a scientist observing a specimen. She let me finish, then calmly said, "We need to talk, in the living room." I trudged after her, feeling like a kid being called to the principal's office. She sat on the armchair. I sat on the couch. The whole room felt like a courtroom. She had this whole speech prepared. It was about her boundaries, her emotional safety, and how my outburst had made her feel threatened. She said that in the heat of the moment, a woman can't give true, enthusiastic consent. That intimacy after a conflict feels coercive. And then she laid it on me. She was introducing a new rule for our marriage, a cooling-off period. After any conflict where she felt I'd been aggressive or dismissive, there would be a mandatory 1-week moratorium on all physical intimacy. No touching, no cuddling, nothing. This was to give her space to process and to ensure that when we were intimate again, it was from a place of genuine connection, not just me getting what I wanted. I was stunned. I told her this was insane, that relationships have ups and downs, and you can't just put up a wall for a week over a carton of milk. That punishing someone by withholding affection is the definition of a toxic relationship. Bad choice of words. Using her own vocabulary against her was a cardinal sin. Her eyes narrowed. She told me my reaction was proving her point, that I was more concerned with my physical needs than her emotional well-being. And for my clear attempt at gaslighting and manipulative behavior, the cooling-off period was now 2 weeks, effective immediately. She stood up and went to the guest room. I just sat there on the couch for what felt like hours. The house was completely silent. I felt like a stranger in my own home. Those first 2 weeks were awful. I tried to apologize. I tried to talk it out. Every attempt was met with a cold shoulder. She'd say she needed her space, that I was violating the boundary she had set. We lived like roommates, polite, distant, surface-level conversations about bills and who was taking the car. The bedroom was the worst part. Sleeping next to someone who has built a fortress around themselves is the loneliest feeling in the world. I kept to my side of the bed. It felt like miles between us. After the 2 weeks were up, I thought maybe things would go back to normal. I was careful. I walked on eggshells. I tried to be the perfect husband. I brought her coffee in bed. I complimented her new haircut. I did all the chores without being asked. Things seemed to thaw a little. We had a decent weekend. We went for a hike, watched a movie. For a moment, it felt like the old days. I started to relax. Then, the next week, it happened again. This time, it was because I disagreed with an opinion her new friend had posted online. Ava saw my comment and confronted me. She asked why I felt the need to publicly undermine another woman. I said I wasn't undermining anyone. I was just expressing a different viewpoint on a political topic. Ava told me that as a man, my opinion on that particular subject was irrelevant, and that by commenting, I was centering myself in a conversation that wasn't about me. She was disappointed that I wasn't an ally. That night, she looked at me with that same clinical expression. I think we need a cooling-off period. This time I didn't argue. I just felt this wave of exhaustion wash over me. I nodded, said okay, and turned over in bed. The silence was deafening. Another week of the silent treatment, of living with a ghost. This became the new pattern. Life was a minefield. Any step could be the wrong one, leaving my socks on the floor, suggesting a restaurant she didn't like, using the wrong tone of voice. Anything could trigger the cooling off period. Sometimes she would announce it. Other times, I'd only find out when I reached for her hand and she pulled it away. Each time, it felt like a small part of me was dying. The rejection was constant. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. I felt like my worth as a husband, as a person, was constantly being evaluated, and I was always found wanting. I tried talking to a friend about it, but it was hard to explain. It sounds so petty when you say it out loud. My wife is mad because I bought the wrong milk. How do you explain the crushing weight of the atmosphere she created? The feeling of being perpetually in the wrong, the loneliness. I started staying late at work. It was easier to deal with complex code than the complex rules of my marriage. At least at work, the logic was consistent. If I did X, Y would happen. At home, the rules were arbitrary and always changing. I started losing weight. I wasn't sleeping well. I felt like a shell of myself. My life was a cycle of trying to please her, failing, and then being punished for it. I remember one specific evening, maybe a few months into this new reality. She had enacted another cooling-off period. I honestly can't even remember why. It was probably something trivial. I was sitting in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen. Ava was in the guest room, processing. I was thinking about our wedding day, the promises we made, in sickness and in health. I never imagined the sickness would be this slow, creeping death of affection, replaced by rules and regulations. I thought about what I wanted, a partner, a friend, someone to share my life with, not a warden who granted parole based on good behavior. The thought that popped into my head was clear and cold. I can't do this anymore. But I didn't know what that meant. Leaving seemed impossible. We had a house, a shared life, years of history. You don't just throw that away over a bad phase. But it didn't feel like a phase. It felt like a fundamental shift in who she was, or maybe who she had always been, and I was just now seeing it. I started to withdraw, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. If every interaction was a potential failure, the only way to win was not to play. I stopped trying to initiate conversations beyond the necessary logistics. I stopped trying to do the little things because they were often misinterpreted and used against me anyway. I stopped asking her about her day because it often led to a lecture about something I couldn't understand. My world became smaller and quieter. Work, home, sleep, repeat. Eva didn't seem to notice at first, or if she did, she probably thought her system was working. She had her space. I wasn't bothering her. The house was quiet, free of conflict, because I was no longer participating. One day, her friend came over. I was in the garage, trying to fix a lawnmower that hadn't worked in years. It was just an excuse to be out of the house. I could hear them talking in the kitchen. I heard my name. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but their voices carried. Ava was complaining about me, about how distant I was, how I wasn't putting any effort into the relationship, how I seemed checked out all the time. Her friend said something about how men withdraw when they can't handle a woman's emotional strength, how my distance was a form of passive aggression, a manifestation of my toxic masculinity, unable to cope with an empowered partner. Ava agreed enthusiastically. They were analyzing me like I was a bug under a microscope. And their conclusion was already written. The problem was me, my masculinity, my failure to evolve. Listening to that, something inside me didn't break. It hardened. It was a moment of absolute clarity. They were wrong. It wasn't my masculinity that was the problem. It was her cruelty, dressed up in fancy, progressive language. She wasn't building boundaries. She was building a cage. And I was the one inside it. I stopped working on the lawnmower. I sat down on an old paint can in the dusty, quiet garage, and I thought. Not about her, not about us. For the first time in a long time, I thought about myself. What did I want? What made me happy before all this? I used to have hobbies. I used to go fishing with my buddies. I used to spend weekends working on my old project car, a classic Mustang that was now just gathering dust under a tarp. I used to play guitar. All of those things had slowly faded away. I was always too busy trying to keep the peace at home, too drained from walking on eggshells. I realized I had completely lost myself in the process of trying to be the person she wanted me to be, and it wasn't even working. So, what was the point? In that moment, sitting in the silence of the garage, I wasn't sad or angry anymore. I just felt nothing. The emotional hold she had on me, the fear of the next cooling off period, the constant anxiety. It was gone. It had been replaced by a profound sense of indifference. I realized I didn't care if she enacted another cooling off period. A week? A month? A year? It didn't matter. You can't be punished if you no longer care about the reward. The reward was her affection, and I had finally accepted it was no longer on the table. At least not in any way that wasn't conditional and transactional. I went back inside later that evening. Ava and her friend were gone. The house was quiet. Ava was in the living room, reading. She looked up when I came in. She said, "You were out there for a long time." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. The old me would have apologized, would have made an excuse or tried to explain. The new me just shrugged. "Yeah, I was thinking." I went to the kitchen, got a glass of water, and went to our bedroom. Not the guest room. Our room. My room. I didn't care about the rules anymore. Later, she came to bed. The air was thick with her unspoken disapproval. I could feel her waiting for me to say something, to apologize for whatever my crime was this time. I just closed my eyes and went to sleep. Or, at least, I pretended to. It was the first night in a long time that I didn't feel anxious. I didn't feel rejected, because I hadn't asked for anything. I hadn't hoped for anything. I was just there. And I knew with absolute certainty that something had changed forever. I just didn't realize how much she was going to hate that change. Her power was based on my caring, and I had just unplugged the machine. The next morning, I woke up before her. This wasn't new, but the feeling was. There was no knot of dread in my stomach. No mental checklist of things I had to do to avoid a conflict. I just felt neutral. I made coffee, but only enough for myself. I sat at the kitchen table and drank it, enjoying the silence. When Ava came out, she paused in the doorway. She saw me, saw the single empty mug on the counter next to the coffee pot. A tiny flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, crossed her face before she smoothed it over. "You didn't make any for me," she stated. I took a sip from my mug. "Pot's still warm," I said, not looking up from my phone. She stood there for a moment longer, expecting more. An apology, an explanation. She didn't get one. With a huff, she made her own coffee. That was the beginning of the new normal. That weekend, I went out to the garage. I pulled the dusty tarp off my '68 Mustang. It had been my passion project before we got married. I'd bought it as a wreck and spent years slowly bringing it back to life. Then life got in the way. The house, the wedding, trying to be a responsible husband. The car became a symbol of a past life, a life where I had my own interests. I opened the door and sat inside. The smell of old leather and stale gasoline filled my lungs. It smelled like freedom. I spent the whole day out there, just cleaning it, taking inventory of what needed to be done, making a list, making a plan. When I came inside that evening, covered in grease and dust, Ava was on the couch. She gave me a look of pure disgust. You're going to track that all over the house." The old me would have been flustered, apologizing profusely, stripping off my clothes at the door. I just looked at her. "I'll clean it up," I said, and walked to the laundry room. No defensiveness, no emotion, just a statement of fact. This seemed to bother her more than an argument would have. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to engage. I was a gray rock. You can't fight with a rock. I started going to the gym after work, every day. It started as a way to kill time, to have a legitimate reason not to be home. But then I started to enjoy it. The physical exertion cleared my head. There was a simple, honest logic to it. You lift the weight, you get stronger. No mind games, no hidden rules. I started eating better. I was sleeping better, too, now that the anxiety was gone. I was transforming, physically and mentally. I reconnected with my old friends. Called up a guy I used to go fishing with. We planned a trip for the next weekend. When I told Ava I was going away for the weekend, she was floored. I hadn't done anything like that on my own in years. She immediately went on the offensive. "So you're just going to leave me here all alone?" It was a classic guilt trip. It used to work every time. "You'll be fine," I said, packing my gear. "The house isn't going to fall down." "It's not about the house, Clyde. It's about us. You're supposed to want to spend time with your wife." I stopped packing and looked at her. For a second, I was tempted to unload everything, to list every cooling off period, every lecture, every punishment, to ask her when exactly she had made spending time with her an enjoyable experience. But I didn't. That would be playing the game. Instead, I just said, "I'll be back Sunday night." And I left. The fishing trip was amazing. We barely caught anything, but that wasn't the point. We sat by the lake, drank cheap beer, and talked. It felt so good to just be normal, to have a conversation that wasn't a minefield. When I got back, the house was spotless. Ava had clearly been on a cleaning rampage. It's what she did when she was trying to exert control over her environment. She had also prepared a huge, elaborate dinner. Candles were lit. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen in ages. The air was thick with expectation. I knew what this was. This was a test, a power play. She was trying to lure me back into the old dynamic, show me what I was missing, remind me of the good times. I was polite. I told her the food was nice. I asked her about her weekend. I kept the conversation light and impersonal. After dinner, as I was clearing the plates, she came up behind me. She put her arms around my waist. "I missed you," she whispered. I froze for a second. My body tensed up. It was a conditioned response, but my mind was clear. I gently removed her arms. "I'm going to work on the car for a bit before it gets too late," I said. I didn't look at her face, but I could feel the heat of her anger and disbelief radiating behind me. I went to the garage, closed the door, and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. That had been close. She was smart. She knew which buttons to push. But I was learning. The next few weeks were a cold war. She alternated between two tactics. The first was trying to provoke a fight. She'd criticize everything I did, the way I loaded the dishwasher, the fact I left a light on, the music I was listening to in the garage. I refused to take the bait. I would either fix the problem without a word, or I'd just give a non-committal shrug. Her provocations needed an emotional response to work. I gave her nothing. It was like she was throwing matches into a bucket of water. When that didn't work, she'd switch to the second tactic, love bombing. She'd be incredibly sweet. She'd pack me a lunch for work. She'd send me texts during the day asking how I was. She'd suggest we watch our show. It was a calculated performance, and it was transparent. She wasn't doing it because she cared. She was doing it to see if the old Clyde was still in there somewhere. The guy who would be so grateful for a crumb of affection that he'd do anything she wanted. But that guy was gone. One night, she decided to confront me directly. I was in the living room, looking at some car parts on my laptop. She turned off the TV and stood in front of me, blocking the screen. "We need to talk," she said. That old familiar line. I slowly closed the laptop. "What's up?" "This, all of this," she said, waving her hand around as if to encompass my entire existence. "The gym, the car, your friends. You're acting like you're a single man." I waited. "You're being cold. You're distant. It's like you don't even live here anymore." "I live here," I said. "I sleep here every night." "That's not what I mean, and you know it. You're not present. You're not engaged in this marriage." Here it comes, I thought. The lecture. "Ava, what do you want from me?" I asked, my voice flat. "I want my husband back. I want the man who cared about me, who cared about us." "The man who walked on eggshells? The one you punished for buying the wrong milk?" The words were out before I could stop them. Her face hardened. "So that's what this is about. You're punishing me." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not punishing you. I'm just done playing the game." "Marriage isn't a game, Clyde." "Mine was," I replied. "It was a game with one set of rules, your rules, and the only way to win was to do exactly what you wanted, when you wanted. I'm tired of playing." She stared at me, her mind clearly racing, trying to find a new angle of attack. "So, you'd rather throw away our marriage than work on your toxic behaviors," she shot back. "My toxic behaviors? You mean like forgetting a grocery item or having a different opinion from your friends?" "You're twisting my words." "Am I? Or am I just finally saying the quiet part out loud?" She had nothing. No prepared script for this. She was used to me cowering, apologizing. This direct, calm opposition was something she couldn't handle. She finally just broke down into tears. It was a dramatic, full-body sob. The old me would have rushed to comfort her. I would have felt like the worst person in the world. Now? I just sat there. I knew it was just another tactic. When tears didn't work, anger was next. When anger didn't work, seduction was next. It was all a means to an end. The end was control. I let her cry for a minute. When she looked up, expecting to see me broken, I just had a neutral expression on my face. "Are you done?" I asked. The crying stopped instantly. Her face contorted with rage. "I can't believe you," she hissed. "You are a cold, heartless—" I held up a hand. "I'm going to bed," I said. "We're not doing this." I stood up and walked out of the room, leaving her there in the middle of the floor. The next day, she officially canceled the cooling-off period. She announced it over breakfast, as if she were bestowing a great gift upon me. "I've been thinking," she said, stirring her yogurt, "and I think we're past the need for those kinds of boundaries. I think we've both grown." I just grunted in response. She didn't get it. She thought the rule was the problem. She didn't understand that the rule just revealed the real problem, her. That night, she made her final, most desperate move. I came home from the gym. The house was dimly lit. There was soft music playing. Ava was in the kitchen, wearing a silk robe. She had made dinner, a really nice dinner. She smiled at me. It was a practiced, seductive smile. "Hi," she said, her voice breathy. "I thought we could have a nice, relaxing evening." I knew exactly where this was going. I played along for a while. I sat down. I ate the food. She kept trying to steer the conversation toward our good memories, our first date, our honeymoon. It was like watching a bad movie. After dinner, she came over to my chair. She sat on my lap. "I want things to be good again, Clyde," she said, trying to kiss my neck. This was it, the moment of truth, the ultimate test of my resolve. I put my hands on her shoulders and gently pushed her back so I could see her face. Her eyes were full of a fake, manufactured passion. "Ava," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "it's not going to happen." Her smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "I mean this, us. I'm not interested." The mask fell completely. Her face went from seductress to confused child in a split second. "You're rejecting me?" she asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and insult. It was probably the first time in her adult life a man had ever said no to her like that. "Yes," I said. It was the simplest, most honest word I had said in years, and it was the most powerful. She slid off my lap and stood up, clutching her robe. The look on her face was something I will never forget. It was the look of a queen who has just realized her castle is made of sand and the tide is coming in. She had lost. She had played her last, most powerful card, and it had been declined. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just stared at me with wide, empty eyes. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I know," I said. And that was the tragedy of it all. She genuinely didn't. In her world, she had done everything right. She had read the blogs. She had listened to her friend. She had tried to fix her problematic husband. She never once considered that she was the one who was breaking everything. The next week was silent. Not the angry, punishing silence from before. This was a dead silence, the silence of an empty tomb. We coexisted in the house, but we didn't interact. I spent my time making calls. I talked to a lawyer. I got my finances in order. I found a new apartment. I was methodical, efficient. There was no emotion involved anymore. It was just a project, the final project of my marriage, dismantling it. One evening, about a week after her failed seduction attempt, I came home from work. She was on the couch, watching TV, pretending everything was normal. Maybe she thought if she ignored it long enough, things would just magically reset. I walked over and placed a thick manila folder on the coffee table in front of her. She looked at it, then at me. Her face was a blank canvas of confusion. I didn't sit down. I stood there, my car keys in my hand. "I've filed for divorce, Eva," I said. My voice didn't shake. "This is your copy of the petition. My lawyer's contact information is on the first page. He'll be in touch with yours." She just stared at the folder. She didn't open it. It was like she was afraid it would burn her if she touched it. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, she was speechless. There was nothing more to say. I had said it all with that folder. I looked around the living room. At the couch we bought together. The pictures on the wall. It was like looking at a museum exhibit of a life that was no longer mine. I felt a brief pang of something. Not sadness. More like nostalgia for a past that was probably never as good as I remembered it. Then it was gone. I turned around and walked to the door. "Goodbye, Eva," I said, without looking back. I walked out the door and didn't stop. I got into my Mustang. The engine turned over with a deep, satisfying roar. It was running perfectly now. I had fixed it. As I pulled out of the driveway, I took one last look at the house. The light was on in the living room. I could see her silhouette, still sitting on the couch, not moving. Just a statue in the ruins of the world she had built. I put the car in gear and drove away. I didn't look back again.